Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program, Heather Mueller, who's Chief Operating Officer at Breakthrough. And today we're going to talk about taking a targeted approach to contract capacity procurement. Now, it's been a roller coaster ride for shippers and carriers the past couple of years in the transportation market. Remember 2018 when transportation spend went through the roof due to capacity constraints, and then of course we had COVID last year, which turned the market upside down yet again, and we're still feeling its effects right now. So the question is, has the time come to transform the transportation procurement process? Many shippers believe so, but how do you get started? And what's the first step? So that's going to be the main focus of our conversation today. And it's great to have Heather on the program to share her insights and advice on this topic. So Heather, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and excited for our conversation today.
Great. Well, Heather, you're a first time guest here on Talking Logistics, and like I always like to do whenever I bring on a new guest, I'm always curious how people get involved with this industry to begin with. So before we dive into transportation procurement and what's happening in that realm, why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with this industry, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Breakthrough?
Yeah, absolutely. My career started in a very different place than I am today. And actually, upon reflection, it's something that I am quite thankful for. So, I started in retail and specifically in marketing and merchandising. So different than my focus today. But one of the things that has become, very clear to me over the course of my career is that really everything is supply chain, and marketing and merchandising happens to just be one end of it, right? And so having the base of what is it to deliver an experience to a client, how does marketing need to be supported by supply chain, how does supply chain deliver on the promise that marketing is making, has been a really nice sort of base for me to have as I moved more deeply into transportation. And so then from that role, I moved, of course, over to Breakthrough. And that's been, gosh, about 8.5 years for me now. Lots of different roles at Breakthrough. I think the one uniting theme has been a focus on client experience. And so it's been a great ride. Coming over to Breakthrough was exciting. It was exciting to be a part of something that was a startup and sort of making some change in the industry. And so then in the last 2.5 years, I've moved into my current position. And that was really in tandem with Breakthrough expanding what our capabilities look like. So for the first probably 14 years of the business, really niche focus on fuel reimbursement and how shippers can help manage cost and emissions associated with their fuel footprints. And then in the last 2.5 years, really thinking about how do we take that ecosystem of data that we have from understanding what transportation looks like for all of our shippers and really leverage it into something that can more broadly speak to operations and procurement in transportation in total.
Wow, well, great journey. And part of the reason I asked that question is that over all the years. So we just celebrated our 8th year on Talking Logistics,
Okay.
and I would say the vast majority of people started somewhere else other than supply chain and the logistics. So you're not, you're more with the what's common as
Yeah.
you're more the rule than the exception. But I would say I don't think we've had anyone that started out in marketing and merchandising and
Yeah.
retail. So I think you might be the first to kind of start there and move into the supply chain logistics role. But great background, and great experience there at Breakthrough, working with many clients over these years. So like I said in my opening comments, a lot of lessons learned, if you will, a lot of things happening over the past few years, especially in 2020. So as you reflect back on your conversations with clients, your work you've done with them, I mean, what would you say was the main learnings or teachings that the shipping community had in 2020, particularly as it relates to strategic planning and procurement strategies?
Yeah. I guess said very simply, even the best plans and sort of the most nuanced and advanced approach to planning can't necessarily predict the future. And I think that what that's really taught us is that in our planning, we need to really think about how do we both plan for what we expect to happen and have process, data, technology solutions that allow us to be nimble for when the unexpected happens. And 2020 could not have highlighted more how unexpected the unexpected can be, and how, old process needs to be looked at, and we need to think about what's the new technology that we have, what are the new data sets that we have to really think about new approaches. And so I think that more than anything, 2020 has given us appetite to think differently about things and shown us how important being able to be responsive and nimble is as a part of our ongoing strategy.
As you were going through that, the comment you said at the beginning there reminded me of what we see in financial statements all the time, right? Past performance is no guarantee of future results, right? And I
Right.
think that's certainly true in the transportation realm. And the role that technology is playing, the role that data and insights is playing in terms of being able to leverage those things to really question the way we've always done things, because I think the way forward begins with really questioning the status quo. And I
Right.
think the way you do that effectively is by, again, leveraging the data and the insights that you have to kind of find a better way. So how did you see, how do shippers then respond or adapt in 2020 from your experience, and what lessons learned do they carry now, and what changes do they need to make to, succeed moving forward?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start by saying not all shippers were impacted equally. And this is true, especially at the March, April timeframe, when the sort of reality of the pandemic was settling in on us. We saw very different behavior if you were a CPG or paper goods shipper as compared to, at that time, if your business was non-essential or shut down for some period of time. So not all experiences looked the same. And I would say at that beginning time frame, really one of the most nimble tools we had to respond was to look to brokerage to be able to support surging capacity needs that shippers had, or new volume that was coming out of plants that was perhaps unexpected. And so that was a lot of what we saw, a surge in sort of spot market activity at that time frame. Then I would say as we settled into the summer months, maybe a bit more stability came into place, and at the very least we started to see some patterns for how consumers were acting. Right. So in total, we're consuming more than ever. And I think that has to do with we can't be consuming services. So we're consuming products. So everyone's shipping more. And then the types of things that are being shipped are, I guess, indicative of pandemic trends perhaps. So we're consuming more at home. So at home food products, the volume is high and remaining high there. At home paper products, same type of story. And so, what we've seen, and I think something that's really interesting is we've started to settle into some trends that we think will persist for some amount of time. But our behavior in transportation, really operations and procurement, hasn't maybe yet level set to those new trends. So we're still seeing sort of outsized spot market activity as compared to a normal year. In the breakthrough ecosystem of data, we see normally shippers are looking at, about 20% brokerage is normal and 80% really contract freight movements. Today, we're looking at something more close to a 50-50 split, really in the high 40s usage of spot carriers in our shippers networks. That's pretty unusual behavior. And it comes at a cost premium in today's environment, as you might expect. At its peak, we were seeing like a 60 cent per mile separation between spot and contract freight. And so we really think and are helping shippers think about, how do I look at my new reality, the new trends that I'm seeing in my freight, and how do I think about contracting better, finding access to asset-based carriers that I maybe haven't worked with before, being more nimble in my approach, and finding partnerships that can support me through this place. And that's something that we're really helping shippers think about, and as we, sort of start 2021 here.
Yeah, we recently published a guest commentary that you wrote that highlighted some of that data, which I found very, very interesting. So I'll alert our viewers to check that out on Talking Logistics, the guest commentary that you wrote. Now, is that mismatch? I mean, is that elevated use of the spot market? Is that mainly because, what's causing that? Is that mainly because the contracted rates are misaligned with today's current reality?
So I think there is that, right? Like the spot market is at a higher price point than contracted freight, and therefore we see more tender turn down activity, for example. But the fundamental driver, the demand thing that's really driving that is that we're just shipping more. And so, I think that brokerage deals really well with volatility that exists in everyone's transportation network. Of course, there are just things that we don't plan for, but we're sort of beyond that. We're just seeing elevated shipments. And so how do we think about contracting for the new level that we need to contract at, and not just simply using brokerage as sort of the stopgap there. So I think there's certainly something about examining the reality of the market rates that we're in today. If you have an RFP or contracts that are outdated by years, it's probably time to take a look at that. But then also there's, we're not in this period of shipment chaos anymore. We're in sort of a new stable level. So let's also take a look at, if I'm a shipper, what's happening at my lane level, at my facility level, and how do I need to think about contracting differently?
Right, right. So is this more kind of targeted, ongoing freight procurement, approach, kind of a new idea? And then how are shippers operationalizing this?
Yeah, really good question. I don't think it's a new idea. I think that we've been talking about the need to advance RFP strategy for a while. I think that this big bang approach to sending a whole network out to bid is disruptive at best. And it's disruptive for both shippers and carriers. And it's also static. It takes a snapshot in time and then sort of projects that forward for a year or, sort of whatever your cadence is. And so I think that as an industry, we've been talking a lot about how do we advance our practices around procurement. Um, and maybe 2020 is the first time where we've decided, wow, we really need to take a look at this. And I think the way that we get our arms around it is with more data, being able to understand what's happening in the ecosystem of freights around me, not just my network. And then also better technology in order to understand where you might need sourcing attention and where things are going really well. You really need to understand what's happening at each lane level every day over the course of a month, over the course of a quarter in my network to make those types of decisions. And so, it's time to, I think, advance some of those practices, and we need data and technology to do it. And we're seeing the importance of having partners that have data and technology like that for shippers to be able to really operationalize this practice.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that, the saying is, from crisis comes opportunity. And I think, you had, like I mentioned in my opening comments, 2018, you had CFOs and CEOs talking in their quarterly reports, financial reports. They were talking about transportation, the fact that it was, off the charts and impacting their P&L and their performance. And then obviously you have COVID now. So I think these things in the past couple of years have served as a catalyst for companies to really say, hey, we've been talking about this for a while. We know that there's, room for improvement. We know that the current process that we've been using for decades really, is kind of misaligned with today's realities. And I think there's enough momentum now in the industry to really walk the talk on, doing some of the things that you talked about here. And then I think, to your point, I think the technology is there now to provide some of that insight. We've got greater access and transparency to data now than ever before. And I think partners, such as yourselves, have the ability to bring that expertise and that knowledge and the tools, to help companies kind of not only understand their market and their network, but putting within that broader perspective, right? I mean, that's part of it too. It's like, it's not only how am I doing, relative to my budget last year or relative to my budget this year, but it's how am I doing relative to other shippers, right?
Right. And where do those pockets of opportunity exist that I wouldn't otherwise have visibility to? I think that idea of how am I doing and what does that mean for the entire ecosystem of transportation around me is really the unlock to being able to take this idea of doing an RFP or sort of right sizing sourcing in an ongoing way from idea to reality. And I think that, what we've seen is historically shippers haven't had a lot of visibility into what does supply and demand of assets look like around me, unless they're out in the market at RFP. And we really think that they need that visibility and sort of access to a more diversified portfolio of asset-based carriers in order to have these ongoing right-sizing conversations, and in order to have the type of partnerships that they need to really operationalize this approach to procurement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned how, which is, has been my experience as well, right? Contract freight, historically, 80% of the moves out there go via contracted carriers, 20% via spot. Obviously, that's more elevated now, as you talked about. But there's so much more activity going on right now, with investments in the spot market. Why do you think that is? Why so much focus and emphasis right now on the spot market, particularly with some of the activities that are going on in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. You just mentioned that out of crisis comes opportunity, and I'll maybe compare it to that a bit. Maybe not crisis, but urgency. I think that spot solutions really solve what feels like an urgent and painful problem for shippers in many cases. The need when your contract carrier can't perform on the lane that you expected them to move freight is like very present and top of mind for us if we've been in that situation. And I think that brokers very successfully have found a model to service that need for shippers. And so there's been a ton of investment there because it feels like a painful problem if you're a shipper in a very sort of present problem in the industry. And then I think that solution providers in this space have been really wise to make these solutions very convenient. It's very easy to use a broker as an important part of your network to get your freight to market. And that's wise. I think that they've done a great job in sort of crafting solutions that meet a market need. And what I'll say is, now that we've tackled what feels urgent and painful to shippers, potentially it's time to take a step back and look at what's strategic, and how do we think about not just solving the symptoms of our problems, having a mismatch in shipper and carrier, or having surge volume that we weren't expecting, and instead addressing the root cause of our problems, having systems that aren't dynamic enough to a moving network, a transportation network, to be able to respond to the changes that we know will inevitably come. And so we think it's such an important time now to look at how do we bring data to bear? How do we bring technology to bear? In a lot of cases, the same data and technology that's been applied to the brokerage problem, and apply it to the strategic transportation level problem, the planning type of activity that we all need to do to be able to settle into a more normal process and a more robust process for contracting our freight.
Yeah, no, great points. And I think, in light of everything we've talked about today, it seems like that momentum is certainly moving in that direction. Well, Heather, we're running a little bit short on time here, so let me just go right to my last question here. I mean, so then, how can, shippers then refocus their strategy, right, to decrease their use of the spot market, more than necessary? And, so what action should they take now to kind of start moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just understanding where we are today, taking a critical look at your network and at the lane level to understand how am I behaving? Do I expect that behavior to persist? And then once you understand your network in a very sort of granular level, what opportunities exist? How do I find a partner that can show me data that would allow me to have a more robust carrier portfolio, find new asset carriers that I potentially haven't worked with? How do I assess what is an appropriate contract rate? I think that's really important as well. Lots of focus on what's going on in spot rates today. Spot rates and contract rates are not the same. So making sure that you can find information about what's an appropriate rate to contract at today and allow that to persist for some time. So I think it's really about understanding your reality as a shipper, finding a partner, finding data sets that can help you understand what's the reality of the transportation market and ecosystem in total, and then finding the technology that you need to operationalize that. How do you match those opportunities with the opportunities that exist in your network in order to move forward in a sustainable way?
Well, great words of advice there. And, we're just getting started with the year here. It'll be great to kind of touch base, let's say mid-year or just as we head into the holiday season, to see, if those lessons learned have been applied. Let's see how that data that you talked about earlier, see if we've brought that use of the spot market down, or what dynamics are there in the market. The one thing we know for sure is that the transportation market is always going to continuously be changing. And the question is, are shippers and carriers, aligned, and are they, working in the best way possible to make sure that it's a win-win, for everybody involved. Heather, again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really great to be here and to chat with you.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you've got any questions for Heather, and you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Breakthrough website or on Talking Logistics, you can post it there. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.